The year is 1713. You have just signed the articles aboard a sloop anchored in Nassau Harbor. You have agreed to share in the plunder, obey the captain in battle, and accept whatever punishment the crew votes upon if you steal from your shipmates. In return, you get one share of every prize the ship captures. That is the deal. But there is a detail nobody mentioned when you put your mark on that paper. It was not the Royal Navy that was most likely to end your life. It was not a musket ball or a hangman's noose. It was the food. The food aboard your new home would do things to your body that no weapon ever could. And by the time you realized what was happening, you would be too weak to stand, too sick to fight, and too far from land to do anything about it. Welcome to Dead Man's Shore. My name is Jack, and today I am going to walk you through exactly what you would have eaten day after day aboard a pirate ship during the Golden Age of Piracy. By the end, you will understand why most of these men never lived to see 30, and why the ocean was actually the least dangerous thing about the entire voyage. If you are new here, subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me, have you ever wondered what pirates actually ate? Because the answer is so much worse than anything Hollywood has ever shown you. Let us begin with the single most important item in your diet. Not meat, not rum, bread. Or rather, what passed for bread on a ship that had been at sea for 3 months. It was called hardtack. Some sailors called it ship's biscuit. Others called it molar breakers, tooth dullers, or worm castles. That last name was not a joke. It was a warning. Hardtack was made from 3 ingredients: flour, water, and sometimes a pinch of salt. The dough was mixed, rolled flat, cut into thick squares, and baked until every last trace of moisture was driven out. The result was a cracker so dense and so impossibly hard that you could not bite into it without risking a tooth. Sailors regularly had to smash it against the deck or soften it in water, broth, or rum just to make it possible to chew. The Royal Navy at one point stamped each biscuit with the Queen's mark and the number of the oven in which it was baked. They even introduced machines that could stamp 60 hexagonal biscuits in a single stroke. Hexagonal, not round, because hexagons packed tighter in the barrel and wasted less space. That is how seriously this cracker was taken. It was engineering. And that was when hardtack was fresh. After a few weeks at sea, the real problem arrived. Weevils. Tiny beetles that burrowed into the biscuit and laid their eggs inside the dough. By the 2nd or 3rd month of a voyage, every single piece of hardtack on the ship was crawling with larvae. You could tap the biscuit against the table and watch them drop out. Some sailors ate their hardtack only in the dark, so they would not have to see what was wriggling in their hands. Others simply swallowed the insects along with the cracker and accepted them as extra nourishment. Because hardtack was the foundation of every meal, without it, there was no meal at all. The United States Navy, over a century later, still issued 14 ounces of hardtack per man per day. That tells you how central this single item remained to life at sea. Pirates carried the same rations, and by the time your ship had been cruising the Caribbean for 2 months, reaching into the biscuit barrel was an act of pure willpower. Now let us talk about the meat, because what arrived in your bowl was barely recognizable as something that had once been alive. The primary protein aboard a pirate ship was salt pork or salt beef. Before the voyage began, the meat was heavily salted, sometimes brined in barrels of strong salt solution, and packed into wooden casks. The salt drew out the moisture and preserved the flesh for months. In theory. In practice, what you hauled out of that barrel after 8 weeks sitting in a tropical hold had changed into something entirely different. The beef turned so dark and so rigid that sailors carved it into buttons and belt buckles. That was not a figure of speech. Multiple accounts from the era confirm that men literally used their dinner as clothing accessories because the meat was more useful as a fastener than as food. According to the descriptions that have survived, dried salt beef resembled nothing so much as a piece of black oak. Salt pork fared somewhat better, but not by much. The salt content was so extreme that the meat had to be soaked in fresh water for hours before anyone could eat it without gagging. And even after soaking, the taste was overwhelmingly salty. The texture was like chewing rope, and the smell was something that would follow you for the rest of your career. Which, for most pirates, lasted about 2 years before disease, injury, or the law caught up with them. And here is the thing about all that salt. Every mouthful of that preserved meat was doing something to your body that nobody in the 1700s understood. A naval physician named William Cockburn actually noticed that sailors on heavy salt diets seemed to develop disease faster. He started recommending oatmeal as an alternative specifically because he believed the constant salt was part of the problem. The Navy eventually listened and officially replaced salted fish with oatmeal in the 1731 regulations. Cockburn was right. He just could not explain why. The relentless sodium was dehydrating your body from the inside, straining your kidneys, and weakening your ability to fight off every other illness that was already creeping through the ship. Beyond the salt meat, the rest of the provisions were not much more appealing. Dried peas were one of the most common items aboard any vessel of this era. They were boiled into a thick porridge called peas pottage or peas pudding. Sometimes the cook added chunks of salt pork for flavor. Sometimes it was just peas and water, simmered until it formed a dense, grayish paste. The famous nursery rhyme about peas porridge in the pot 9 days old was not some whimsical invention. It was a description of real practice. On board ship, porridge was cooked once and reheated over and over. As the water evaporated, it thickened. As days passed, it became dense and paste-like. But it remained edible. That was the only quality that mattered. There was also oatmeal, served as a watery gruel called burgoo. There was cheese and butter when the ship had them, though both went rancid in tropical heat faster than almost anything else on board. There was dried fish on some ships, though the English Navy actually stopped issuing salted fish after the 1720s because it spoiled so quickly in the damp hold that it caused more problems than it solved. And there were beans, a surprisingly important source of protein and fiber on pirate ships, often the only thing standing between the crew and complete nutritional collapse. What you ate depended on who you were. Officers and the captain received better provisions, including access to dried spices, butter, and herbs. The captain's table sometimes included fresh bread baked in a small oven reserved for officers. Common sailors and pirates ate from communal pots, served identical portions of whatever the cook had prepared that day. A food historian once summarized the class divide aboard ship with a single observation. The appearance of a dish told you exactly who was going to eat it. That was your daily reality. Hardtack crawling with weevils, salt meat that doubled as belt material, gray porridge from the same pot for a week, rancid butter, and a cup of something you hoped was still drinkable. Every single day, for months on end, with no variation and no relief. And what do you think? Could you handle even a week of that? Write in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Now I need to tell you about the thing that killed more pirates than cannonballs, cutlasses, and the gallows combined. And it came directly from the diet I just described. Scurvy. The word itself became a pirate insult, "Ye scurvy dog." But the actual disease was no joke. It was the single greatest killer of sailors in the age of sail. More lethal than storms, more lethal than shipwrecks, more lethal than combat, more lethal than every other disease combined. Between 1500 and 1800, an estimated 2 million sailors died from scurvy alone. Ship owners and governments of the era simply calculated a 50% death rate from the disease on any major voyage and built it into their planning. Half your crew expected to die before the ship even returned to port. Scurvy is caused by a severe deficiency of vitamin C. Your body cannot make it. It cannot store it for long. And after roughly 4 to 6 weeks without any fresh fruits or vegetables, the first symptoms appear. Tiredness so deep it was once mistaken for laziness. Aching joints. Skin that bruises at the lightest touch. Then it progresses. Your gums swell, turn spongy, and begin to bleed. Your teeth loosen in their sockets. Your breath turns so foul that other sailors avoid standing near you. Dark splotches appear across your skin from bleeding just beneath the surface. And then, the truly disturbing phase begins. Old wounds reopen. Scars from injuries that healed years ago split apart as if the original damage had never been repaired. Because, in a sense, it had not. Vitamin C is essential for producing collagen, the protein that holds your body together. Without it, your body literally comes undone. And there was another symptom that the historical accounts describe in haunting detail. As scurvy advanced, sailors began experiencing extraordinarily vivid dreams and hallucinations, almost always about food. Beautiful, perfect meals laid out before them, so real they could smell the bread and taste the butter. And when they woke, the food was not there. A 17th century physician named Thomas Willis described this phase as a falling down of the whole soul. There are records of hardened officers, men who had survived combat and hurricanes, simply sitting on the deck and weeping because the feast they had seen in their dream had vanished, and all that remained was another day of hardtack and salt. George Anson, on his circumnavigation in the 1740s, lost nearly 1,300 of his 2,000 men within the first 10 months. The overwhelming majority died of scurvy. During the 7 Years' War, the Royal Navy enlisted roughly 185,000 sailors. Over 133,000 were lost, primarily to disease, with scurvy leading the count by an enormous margin. At the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, the Spanish fleet had ships with over 200 scurvy cases each. One ship reported more than 300. The British, thanks to decades of slowly adopting citrus rations, were healthier. That nutritional advantage helped win the battle. The cure was absurdly simple. A Scottish naval surgeon named James Lind proved it in 1747 with the first controlled clinical trial in medical history. He took 12 scurvy patients, divided them into 6 pairs, and gave each pair a different treatment. Cider, diluted sulfuric acid, vinegar, seawater, a paste of plant extracts, or 2 oranges and a lemon each day. Only the pair eating citrus recovered. The proof was absolute. But the medical establishment dismissed his findings because they contradicted the accepted theory that scurvy was caused by damp air and digestive problems. The Royal Navy did not officially adopt lemon juice as standard issue until 1795. And during the Golden Age of Piracy, which ended around 1725, nobody had a clue what caused the disease or how to prevent it. Your body was falling apart, and nobody could tell you why. Now let us talk about water, because on a pirate ship in the 1700s, the water situation was somehow even worse than the food. Fresh water was stored in large wooden casks sealed with pitch and stacked in the hold, the hottest and most humid part of the ship. The standard allowance was roughly half a gallon per man per day, though on long voyages, this was frequently rationed down to a few mouthfuls. Within 2 to 3 weeks at sea, the water began to change. Algae bloomed inside the casks. The water turned green, then developed a thick, slimy film across the surface. The taste became organic and foul in a way that made your stomach revolt before the liquid even reached it. Casks sometimes leaked, reducing the supply further. Storms could smash them apart below decks, flooding the hold with precious fresh water that drained into the bilge and was gone forever. The buccaneer William Dampier recorded losing several large casks of water to a single wave that rolled through the ship. This is exactly why alcohol was not a luxury aboard a pirate ship. It was survival. Rum did not spoil the way water did. Beer lasted longer than plain water. Grog, that famous mixture of rum and water, served a double purpose. It made the water drinkable, and it provided calories your body desperately needed. When the water ran out and the rum was gone, and the ship sat becalmed in the tropics with no wind and no rain, crews resorted to catching rainwater in sails that had been soaked in salt spray, wringing out damp cloth, and rationing each man to swallows instead of cups. Dampier once recorded saving 23 barrels of rain during a storm and considered it extraordinary luck. There was, however, one food that could genuinely save your life at sea, and it moved on 4 legs, very, very slowly. The giant tortoises of the Galapagos Islands were, for the pirates and buccaneers who found them, the closest thing to a miracle the ocean ever offered. These creatures weighed hundreds of pounds. Their meat was fresh, rich in fat, and by every surviving account, absolutely extraordinary to eat. William Dampier described them as extraordinarily large and fat, and so sweet that no young hen eats more pleasantly. Other sailors wrote about the meat in terms that bordered on worship. Buttery beef, unctuous mutton. Whaling captains called it the finest food they had ever tasted. And the oil rendered from their bodies was described as pure as butter and used in place of it. But the real value was not the flavor. It was the fact that a giant tortoise could survive in the dark hold of a ship for up to a year without food or water. Sailors flipped the tortoises onto their backs, lowered them below decks, and left them there, alive, until someone needed a fresh meal. For crews that had spent months eating nothing but salt and starch, a tortoise was a walking pantry that never spoiled. The cost was staggering. Between the pirates of the 1600s and the whalers of the 1800s, an estimated 15,000 tortoises were taken from the Galapagos for food. Each whaling ship reportedly loaded between 500 and 600 animals per visit. The Floriana tortoise subspecies was driven to complete extinction. These animals had no natural predators on land. They had never learned to run from anything. And then humans showed up with empty stomachs and empty casks. It took nearly 300 years after their discovery for a single Galapagos tortoise specimen to reach a European museum without being eaten during the voyage. That single fact tells you everything about how desperate food conditions were at sea. The man who turned all of these ingredients into something resembling a meal was the ship's cook, and his qualifications were, to put it politely, limited. On many pirate ships, the cook was simply whoever drew the short straw, or whoever had been injured badly enough that he could no longer climb rigging or haul on ropes. It was common practice to assign the role to a man who had lost a limb in battle. He worked over an open fire in a small brick-lined section of the ship called the galley, using heavy iron pots, a spit, and whatever fuel was available. His understanding of food safety was non-existent by any standard. His primary method was boiling. Everything was boiled. Salt meat was boiled. Peas were boiled. Oatmeal was boiled into burgoo. Hardtack was sometimes smashed and boiled into a thick paste. The dishes had names. Lobscouse was a stew of salt meat and whatever vegetables remained. Burgoo was oatmeal gruel. And salmagundi was the closest thing to a feast, a cold dish assembled from chopped salt meat, pickled fish, hard-boiled eggs, onions, cabbage, olives, and whatever spices or vinegar the ship still carried, all tossed together and served from a single communal dish. No cooking fuel was needed for salmagundi, which made it valuable when firewood was running low, and it was served equally to every man on board, from the captain down to the newest recruit. It was not just a meal. It was a demonstration of how a pirate ship operated, democratic to the last bite. But those moments of variety were rare. Most days, the cook ladled out the same gray, salty, boiled mixture from the same blackened pot, and you ate it because there was nothing else. And you were already thinner than you had been the week before. So here is the complete picture. You are aboard a sloop in the Caribbean, 1713. Your breakfast is a piece of hardtack riddled with weevil larvae, softened in whatever liquid you can get your hands on. Your main meal is boiled salt pork or beef, so tough and so salty that your throat burns, served alongside a grayish paste of dried peas that has been reheating for days. Your drink is green, slimy water from a pitch-sealed cask in the hold, or rum that you depend on to make the water tolerable. Within 6 weeks without fresh provisions, your gums begin to bleed, your teeth loosen, bruises appear on your arms without any injury to cause them. Old scars start to crack open. You feel a tiredness that goes deeper than muscle, deeper than bone. And every night, your body tortures you with dreams of perfect meals that vanish the moment you open your eyes. You eat rats when you catch them. You eat whatever comes up in a net on the rare occasions anyone has time to fish. If your ship captures a prize, you devour any fresh food aboard before it spoils. And if you make landfall at the Galapagos or some other island, you fill yourself with tortoise meat and wild fruit until your body remembers what nutrition feels like. But then you sail on, and it all begins again. We romanticize this life. We put it in movies and theme parks. We picture the freedom, the adventure, the gleam of stolen gold. But the truth is that every pirate who sailed during the Golden Age was locked in a daily, desperate fight against starvation, disease, and food that was actively working against him. The ocean was not the enemy. The Navy was not the greatest threat. The food was. And it won far more often than anyone likes to admit. So tell me in the comments, after everything you have heard today, would you still sign those articles? Would you still step aboard that ship? Thank you for watching. My name is Jack. This is Dead Man's Shore. Subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you on the next voyage.